Okay, so when we designed our new development matters for Tapestry, does anyone want to discuss how we came up with the idea and what the approach was?
I think our conversations really went to how can we help practitioners to find those gaps without ticking, because that's what people want. And it went back to that whole finding the groups of children that need those supports. So we talked about, instead of being able to tick the statements in each pathway, what we said, for each area, just being able to flag it. So you can say, right, so this observation is about literacy. And that is all you have to do. And then what we said we would do then is for the tracking side of things, just have the option to say in that area, this child is where they should be developmentally. No, they're not where they should be developmentally, or further discussions. And we felt that further discussion one was a really vital part, because actually it's about those discussions that you have with your colleagues that's going to really open up the change, sort of what you bring in for your curriculum and things like that, and help those children. So I think for the data wise, all you're going to have is these groups of children that you're then supporting and everything. You'll be able to say, well, these children are where they should be. And I understand the worry that people have from their SLT. How can I show progress? I know that is a big, big thing, especially in schools. But I think what you'll be able to show with this is that actually I had this group over here who needed the support. And actually now, through my planning and through my curriculum, and by identifying them early on, I've been able to say they are now where they should be developmentally. And that is your progress. You've closed that gap, if you want to go to use that phrase, closing the gap.
Yeah. And I think if you're worrying about Offstage specifically, I think in my experience, Offstage, the two important things that they wanted to see were, have you identified those children early on, the ones that need support, and what have you put in place to help them? And that's what we've tried and designed the whole thing around. And I think that's the two most important things. So hopefully that will kind of cover that side of it as well.
Yeah.
So the pupil progress meetings that teachers have on a termly basis will be more around a narrative description of those individual children or groups of children, rather than sheets and sheets of percentages and data. So those conversations are going to be much more interesting for both parties. I think I was a governor and used to attend some of those pupil progress meetings, and I just used to glaze over sheets and sheets of pie charts and Excel stuff, which when you don't know the children as a governor, I only went in probably 2 or 3 times a term. I didn't really know those children that well. It was a completely pointless exercise, I think. It didn't reassure me as a governor that things were going well. And so I think those conversations are going to be much more meaningful.
It's very much like performance management, and you said, right, tell me a percentage of children that are going to get to GLD at the end of the year. Okay, 70%. No, that's not high enough. Okay, 75%. Okay, that's all right. What about that? What about that 25% that haven't got it? Are you worried about them, or are you just worried about this number on a spreadsheet? And that's all it became. It was just 75%. That's your target, say.
Didn't matter which children that 75% was.
No. And there was no sort of, this is what you're going to do for those 25%. And that's when it became ridiculous, I think, because it was just a number plucked out from nowhere. And there was no real, I felt there was no real benefit to having that number. Actually, if you want me to tell you how many children I want to get to GLD, it's 100%. But what am I going to do to make sure that all children get to it? And, that's what it should be about.
And the most efficient way of doing that is identifying the ones that you're worried about to begin with.
Yeah.
It's hugely important that senior leadership teams find alternative ways to carry out these exercises, whether it be performance management or data collection. And to be honest, until every setting has had an Ofsted inspection and they can trust in themselves that they are not going to get asked those questions. It is very recent history that Ofsted were going in and asking to see that stuff. So it's quite understandable that there's a level of nervousness. I went through this process. What's happened in early years now is sort of mirroring what happened in the world of special education a few years ago, where P scales were removed, and there was so much nervousness. Well, how do we show progress then if we can't refer to the P scales? And what are we going to tell Ofsted? And it took a little bit of time, but I think schools have generally got round to the idea that you don't need to talk about data. You need to be able to tell the story of that child's learning, and which is sort of what Helen was saying, really, that narrative of, can we get back to those basics of being able to communicate to parents, to SENCOs, to leadership teams within our own team? Can we all talk about what this child has learned since they came into our room and how we have influenced that learning? And that has to be the crux of it, really, doesn't it? And if we have not influenced that learning, what are we going to do differently? And what are we going to change? And what additional support are we going to give? And who are we going to ask to come and help us? And it has to be getting back to that, really, I think. And realistically, as a parent, as a senior leader, they're the things that I want to know. I don't want to hear that my child's made 40% progress within a level or something. Who cares? And the difference, being a deputy head then, it was hugely different for me when I started having those conversations with teachers and support staff about what a child's learning looked like, as opposed to what I'd been doing for years and years about, well, they've made 50% progress through this. Because then when I spoke to the parents, I genuinely knew what they'd learned that year. And if I was sat in a review meeting or a progress meeting, I could contribute, knowing that I actually know something about what this child has done this year and how our input as a school had affected that, and how the parents' input had affected that, and how that mentality of working together for the sole purpose of progress for that child, and what that progress, what was important about that progress, I suppose, and how child-centered it was, and how valuable it was, really.
It's interesting because it comes, sorry, Helen,
No, go on,
it comes back to the, like, who are we doing this data for? And you mentioned, obviously your experience as a parent, Stephen. I remember when I was a teacher and I used to do parents' evenings, I always used to start every meeting with a question to them, which is, what do you want to know? And 90% of the time it was the two questions. It was, what have they been up to? And are they happy? And I think that's the two things that parents want to know. So they don't want to know percentages, and they don't want to know numbers. They want to know those two things. And you can do that by having a very frank, honest discussion with them. And I think that's the crux, and that's what this shift in documentation is trying to move towards.